There's a moment, and every soldier knows it, where you say something stupid just to fill the silence. You're standing in a line that doesn't move. Your boots are cutting into your ankles. The recycled air smells like someone burned synthetic protein 3 days ago and nobody opened a vent. Your squad is exhausted, you're exhausted, and someone's going to say something dumb just to break the tension. That someone was me. It's always me. My name is Corporal Dax Merritt, 26 years old, former agricultural technician from Beaumont, Texas. Current occupant of Staging Bay 7 aboard the GCS Varanthal, a galactic coalition troop carrier that smelled like mildew and institutional disappointment. I had a chipped front tooth, a scar on my left forearm from a combine harvester when I was 16, and a habit of saying things without thinking them through first. This is the story of how that habit almost got me killed, and then saved my life, and then complicated everything else. Let me set the scene properly, because you're not going to understand what happened if you don't understand where we were and what was going on. It was the 43rd day of the Varanthal deployment, which sounds dramatic until you understand that 42 of those days had been nothing. Logistics holds, transit corridors, 2 days of orbital standby outside a moon called Drevash 9 while diplomatic teams argued about landing rights. We were a coalition mixed battalion, humans, Vithrani, a handful of Drelok engineers, and one Gruvani heavy specialist named Balkan who stood 9 feet tall and communicated primarily through resonant chest vibrations. We were theoretically combat-ready. In practice, we were bored out of our minds. The assignment had started as a real one, a contested resource corridor near the outer Velt systems, where 3 different factions were arguing over mineral rights to a chain of asteroid belts. Human miners had been working the sector for 11 years. Then the Krathian Dominion showed up. Then the Velhari Free Territories decided they had ancestral claims. Then the coalition stepped in as peacekeepers, which in practice meant we stood around looking armed while politicians talked and nothing got resolved. That was the job. Stand around, look armed, go nowhere. The Varanthal staging bays were long, low-ceilinged spaces with maglock flooring and overhead lighting that flickered on a 3-second cycle in Bay 7 specifically, which the maintenance team kept promising to fix and never did. There were 240 soldiers in our battalion. About 60 of us were human. The rest were coalition species, all in varying states of boredom, irritation, or whatever the species-specific equivalent was for I would rather be literally anywhere else. My squad had claimed a stretch of floor near the starboard bulkhead. There were 6 of us, me, Private First Class Yolanda Ferreira, Yo for short, Specialist Cade Okonkwo, Private Lena Strom, Corporal Hans Divik, and Private Ramai Faustina, who was 19 years old and still convinced that everything in the galaxy was a grand adventure. We'd been playing cards for 4 hours, not because we were winning, I was losing badly, but because there was nothing else to do. That's when the announcement came through. The ship's intercom system on the Varanthal was a magnificent piece of engineering that had been installed in the wrong frequency range for human hearing, which meant every announcement sounded like someone was trying to speak through a wall of wet insulation. You got about 60% of the words and had to guess the rest from context. Attention to all personnel, Coalition Command has authorized Carveth Accords, temporary bilateral integration, Kaelvith Warbride delegation, Staging Bay, all units. Hans looked up from his cards. What? Play your card, Yo said without looking up. Did they say Warbride? Ramai asked. Yo looked up then. See, I knew the word Kaelvith. Every human soldier in the outer systems knew the word Kaelvith by now. The Kaelvith were, and I'm simplifying here because the full political and biological context takes about 6 hours to explain properly. They were one of the oldest spacefaring species in the outer Velt sector. Humanoid in basic shape. Bilaterally symmetric, 2 arms, 2 legs, head on top, the usual setup. But that's where the similarity to anything familiar stopped. The Kaelvith were what xenobiologists called hemolytic predators, which was the scientific way of saying they were, functionally, space vampires. Not the dramatic kind, not the theatrical kind, the real, biological, deeply unsettling kind. Their metabolism ran on processed hemolytic compounds. Essentially, they had evolved from ambush predators who fed on the blood of prey, and over hundreds of thousands of years that had become refined into a sophisticated biological process. They didn't need to hunt anymore. Their civilization had been manufacturing synthetic hemolytic nutrients for centuries, but the biology was still there. The instincts were still there. The physical adaptations were absolutely, definitely, undeniably still there. They were fast, inhumanly fast, even by alien standards. They had a secondary circulatory system that could flood their muscles with something that wasn't quite adrenaline, but functioned similarly. Their reflexes operated at a speed that made most coalition soldiers look like they were moving through setting concrete. They also had fangs. That's not me being dramatic. That's anatomy. Two elongated upper canines adapted over evolution, used in their early predatory history for, well, you know what they were used for. The Kael'veth had joined the Galactic Coalition 14 years ago, after a long period of what diplomats euphemistically called trust building. The Coalition needed their territory. The Kael'veth needed resources. It was a pragmatic arrangement, but they were not popular. Humans especially had a whole complicated cultural reaction to them that mixed genuine fear with something older and more irrational. The kind of fear you get when something looks human enough to read as person but moves and functions in ways that remind you that you are, in fact, soft and full of blood. And the Warbride part. That was specific. The Kael'veth had a military tradition called the Verith, loosely translated as Warbride, though some xenoanthropologists argued the translation missed nuance. The Verith were an elite caste of Kael'veth warriors who also served a diplomatic function. In Kael'veth culture, military alliance had historically been sealed through what they called a claiming bond, a formal pairing between a Verith warrior and a representative of the allied faction. It was part biological, part cultural, deeply serious to them, and a PR nightmare for the Coalition's Human Relations Department. The Coalition had spent 3 years negotiating what this tradition meant in a modern multi-species context. The current compromise was that Verith could participate in joint operations and could formally declare claiming interest in individuals. But any actual bond required full, informed, voluntary consent from both parties, with a mandatory 72-hour consideration period, and the right to refuse with no political consequence. In theory, that's what the diplomats said. In theory. So they're actually sending them here, Yo said, setting down her cards slowly. The announcement said bilateral integration, Hans said. He'd pulled out his comm unit and was reading something. Joint exercises, starting tomorrow. We're getting a full Verith contingent embedded with our battalion. How many? Cade asked. 12. The number sat in the air for a second. 12, Ramai repeated, like he was checking that he'd heard it right. 12, Hans confirmed. There were 240 of us. What's the ratio? I asked before I really thought about it. Everyone looked at me. What? I said. I'm just asking mathematically. That's 1 Verith for every 20 of us. Those are pretty good odds. Dax, Yo said. I'm just saying. You're not just saying. It's a joke. It is not a joke, Yo said firmly. It is you not thinking before you speak, which is different from a joke. Ramai had gone slightly pale. He was from somewhere in rural Norway, and I had the impression that his cultural context for vampires was both more dramatic and more recent than mine. Are they actually going to, the claiming thing? That's real, right? That actually happens. Only with full consent, Hans read from his comm. It says right here, Coalition Regulation 7741 see mandatory consent, 72-hour consideration, right to refuse. Right, Ramai said. He didn't sound reassured. They're warriors, Cade said. He was from Lagos, had been in the Coalition for 6 years, and had the serene demeanor of someone who'd already metabolized most of the terrifying things the galaxy could throw at a person. They're here to fight alongside us. That's all. With fangs, Ramai said. Yes, with fangs. The Drelok have 16 fingers. Balkan over there could crush this entire bulkhead with one hand. Everyone's got something. The Kael'veth have fangs and they're fast. Focus on the useful parts. That made sense. Cade usually made sense. I should have listened to Cade and left it there. But the flickering light in Bay 7 had been going for 43 days, and the cards were turning bad for me, and I was 26 years old and from Texas, and sometimes your mouth just goes before your brain catches the reins. You know what, I said, if one of those Verith wants to claim me, I say go for it, At this point, I'll take what I can get. Hey, and I tilted my head back toward the ceiling like I was addressing the universe. I'll take a Warbride. Anyone sending Warbrides, I'm available. Low standards. Comes with his own boots. Yo put her face in her hands. Cade looked at me with the expression of a man watching someone walk slowly toward a large, clearly marked hole in the ground. Ramai laughed a little hysterically. Hans said nothing, but he'd gone very still, and he was looking at a point about 4 feet behind my left shoulder. I didn't notice Hans going still. That was a mistake. That's a real thing you just said a voice behind me. I have thought about that moment many times since, about the exact speed at which my shoulders went rigid, about how I became suddenly, acutely aware of every inch of the space between myself and whatever was behind me, about how the air in Bay 7, which was already recycled and thin, seemed to get about 4 degrees colder. I turned around slowly. She was standing, and this is the first image I have of her, burned into my memory about 3 feet behind me. She was tall, maybe 6'2", 6'3". Wearing Coalition-issued tactical gear, but modified. The plating was darker, matte black against the standard charcoal gray, and there were marks along the shoulder pieces that I would later learn were Verith rank indicators. Her hair was black and pulled back with ruthless practicality, not a strand loose. Her skin was a pale grayish-white, the kind that on a human would mean severe illness, but on a Kael'veth was simply normal, a biological feature of a species that evolved in lower light environments. Her eyes were the thing that stopped me. Kael'veth eyes are, I knew this from the briefings. I'd seen the xenobiology files. But seeing them in a briefing, and seeing them 3 feet from your face in a staging bay, after you've just loudly offered yourself as a matrimonial candidate to the universe, are 2 very different experiences. They're dark, not just brown or black, dark, the kind of dark that seems to have depth to it, like looking into something that goes back further than it should. And around the pupil, just at the edge, there was this faint luminescence, a pale silver-blue ring, bioluminescent, a trait the xenobiologists said was related to Hunt state activation, but which in modern Kael'veth presented as a kind of passive ambient glow that meant absolutely nothing threatening, but looked like something straight out of every human night terror that had ever existed. She was looking at me like she had categorized me in about 3 seconds, and found the categorization both accurate and mildly entertaining. Tarvith Warbride is an offer of alliance, she said. Her basic was precise and accented, each word shaped with careful articulation. In my culture, it is not made lightly, and it is not made as a, she paused, and I had the impression she was choosing the word with surgical precision, joke. Right, I said. My voice came out completely normal. I was very proud of that. Yeah, I knew that. Did you? Absolutely. She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression didn't exactly change, but there was something in it, not quite amusement, not quite appraisal. Something that combined the two in a way that had no human equivalent I could name. I am Kiveth Verith Sarainvel Drath, she said. First Blade of the 3rd Verith Contingent, attached to Coalition Battalion 17 under the Karvath Accords. She let that settle for a second, and I heard what you said. The staging bay was quiet. I was aware of my entire squad not moving. I was also aware of, behind her, 2 other Kael'veth soldiers standing in the entrance to Bay 7, watching this exchange with expressions that were impossible to read. Corporal Dax Merritt, I said. I was. Making a joke, she said. Yes, I understood that. Good, great. So we're clear. We are clear, Sarainvel Drath said, that you made a joke about something my people consider sacred. She didn't say it with heat. She said it the way you state a fact, evenly, clearly, without editorial. In Kael'veth tradition, a public declaration of claiming availability, however it is framed, carries weight. There is a protocol. I stopped. Sorry, what? A protocol? She tilted her head very slightly. You are not obligated to honor it. Coalition Regulation 7741C is explicit. You may refuse with no political consequence. Okay, I said, good. However, she said, that word, that single small, terrible word. However, she continued, our contingent is newly embedded. There are tensions, you are aware of this. My people are not trusted easily here. A formal refusal made publicly in the first hour of our arrival would, she paused again, and again I had that sense of precise word selection, set a tone. I looked at her. She looked at me. So you're asking me, I said slowly, not to formally refuse because it would look bad. I am explaining the cultural context, she said. What you do with it is your choice. Behind me, I could feel my squad holding their collective breath. Cade, who did not rattle easily, was rattled. I could tell because he'd put down his cards and was watching this the way you watch something that's either going to be fine or be a catastrophic incident, and you genuinely can't tell which. What does not formally refusing actually mean? I asked. It means, Sarenvel-Drath said, that by Kael'thas custom you have expressed provisional claiming interest, which places you in a period of consideration, which has a time limit, which you may exit at any point with a formal refusal and the matter ends there. And the time limit is 72 hours. I stared at her. That's the same as Coalition Regulation 7741C, I said. Yes, she said. We were very involved in the drafting of that regulation. I did not sleep well that night. Let me be clear about something. I was not scared of Sarenvel-Drath in any way that I'm ashamed to say I was scared. It wasn't that kind of fear. It wasn't the animal, bolt-for-the-exit kind that people describe when they're talking about a Kael'thas encounter gone wrong. It was more like, have you ever been in a situation where someone is operating on a level of precision and intentionality that you simply cannot match, and you know it, and they know it, and you're just trying to look like you have some idea what's happening? That's what it was. She knew exactly what she was doing, every word, every pause, every careful, measured sentence. I'm a guy who said the wrong thing in a staging bay, and had not yet figured out how to undo it gracefully. Yo lay on her bunk about 2 feet to my right and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, Dax. Yeah. You know that this is not actually a crisis. I know. She told you, clear as anything. You can refuse, the thing ends, no consequence. I know. So why are you staring at the ceiling like you're defusing a bomb? I thought about it. Because she did something, I said. She came over. She heard me and she came over and she talked to me and she didn't have to do that. She could have just let it go. We're strangers on a ship. Yo didn't say anything for a second. Maybe she was handling a diplomatic situation, she said. Like she said, setting a tone. Maybe. Or maybe, Yo said carefully. She was curious about the idiot who offered himself to the universe and wanted to see what that idiot looked like up close. That's also possible. Go to sleep, Dax. Yeah. I stared at the ceiling for another 2 hours. Joint exercises started at 600 the next morning. The Verith contingent was 12 soldiers. 8 women, 4 men. The Kael'thas didn't make the gender distinctions humans did exactly, but those were the approximate translations. They were embedded into our squads in pairs, which meant my squad got 2. Sarenvel-Drath and a younger Verith named Kayvon, who was maybe the equivalent of 22 human years, with a quieter presence and a habit of observing everything with the careful attention of someone cataloging information they'd use later. The exercises were tactical. Simulated breach operations, corridor clearing, rapid response to a hostile-controlled position. Standard battalion training adapted for mixed species deployment, which meant accounting for the fact that Balkan could knock down walls that we were supposed to go around, and that the Verith moved in ways that required their human squadmates to completely recalibrate their spatial awareness, because they could cover ground at a speed that broke every assumption you'd built about where your flanking support was going to be. I'll tell you this, watching Sarenvel-Drath move through a simulated breach operation was educational. That's the word I'll use, educational. She didn't run in the way that humans run, or even in the way that Vithrani move, which is fast but readable, you can track it. She was there and then she was somewhere else, and the intermediate steps existed, but they happened at a speed your eye couldn't quite follow cleanly. Not supernatural. Nothing actually supernatural about it, pure biology, fast-twitch muscle fiber density, a secondary circulatory system that could spike performance in short bursts. But watching it. Ramai, standing next to me during the observation phase before we were integrated into the exercise, made a very quiet sound. Yeah, I said. Yeah. She's going to be in our squad. She already is in our squad, I said. Pay attention. The exercise integration was interesting for a different reason. Because the Verith were fast and precise and operated with a tactical vocabulary developed over a very long military tradition. But they were also, and I want to be honest about this, not perfect. The speed was real. The individual combat capability was absolutely real. But they had been developed historically as ambush hunters. Short burst, decisive engagement, withdraw. The coalition's style of sustained tactical operations, holding a corridor, maintaining a defensive perimeter, coordinating a slow, methodical advance, those weren't natural to them. They had learned them. They were applying them professionally, but you could see the adaptation. And here's the thing about that. The moment I saw it, the moment I recognized that Seren Drath was working at something rather than finding it natural, something shifted a little bit in my chest. Not much. Just a small movement. Because there's something about watching someone who is genuinely extraordinary at most things work hard at the one thing that doesn't come easy. Something that reads as unexpectedly human, even when it very much isn't. I filed that away somewhere and didn't look at it directly. The first real conversation we had, like an actual conversation, not the formal staged exchange in the staging bay, happened on the third day. We'd been running double drills. My squad had a 2-hour rest block in the afternoon, and I'd taken my meal ration to the observation deck. A narrow strip of transparent hull plating running along the forward section of the ship, where you could see into open space if the atmospheric shielding was set to clear, which it was about half the time. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the wall eating synthetic grain, something that the packaging claimed was savory herb flavored, staring out at the outer veldt, which was, whatever your feelings about your current circumstances, genuinely, arrestingly beautiful. It was a dense sector. A lot of stars, a lot of close-orbit debris fields, the kind of sky that looked almost painted because no one atmosphere-adjusted human eye should be seeing that density of light. She sat down about 6 feet away from me. Not next to me, not across from me. 6 feet, which I'd learn later was a Kelvith distance setting that communicated something like I'm not approaching, I'm not retreating, I'm choosing to be here with no particular agenda. I didn't know that then. I just knew she sat down and looked out at the stars. We sat in silence for about 4 minutes. I'm not bad at silence. I talk a lot, but I can do silence when I have to. The veldt is older than both our civilizations, she said finally. Yeah, I said. This sector was mapped by the Verith 12,000 years ago. Not this crew. The historical Verith, the first ones, before we had ships. When we navigated by light readings and took years to move between systems. I looked out at the stars. 12,000 years ago humans were, I don't know, drawing things on cave walls, building the first permanent settlements maybe. And in 12,000 years, she said, here we are. On a coalition transport eating synthetic grain that tastes like cardboard. Something crossed her face. I wasn't sure if it was amusement or something adjacent to it. Mine tasted like... She looked at the small container she was holding. The packaging says citrus protein blend. It tastes like nothing. Yeah, coalition catering is the great equalizer. She looked back at the stars. The silver-blue light around her eyes was dimmer in the observation deck's low light, barely there, just a suggestion. It made her look less, I don't know, less like a briefing file. More like a person sitting in a hallway looking at stars, because the exercise rotation had given her 2 hours, and she didn't know what else to do with them. I want to ask you something, she said. Okay. The joke you made in the staging bay. She didn't look at me when she said it, still watching the stars. Was it specifically about us, about Kelvith, or was it? No, I said, it wasn't about you specifically. I thought about how to say the rest of it. It was we've been deployed for 43 days and nothing has happened. We're bored and stuck and the cards are going badly and I said something stupid to fill dead air. It wasn't about the Verith or Kelvith or it was just dumb. A dumb thing I said. She was quiet for a moment. My people are not, she started and then paused, started again. When we were assigned to this deployment, there was debate within the contingent about whether the cultural difference was too significant, whether jokes like the one you made were, another pause, whether they indicated that humans weren't ready for close integration with Verith. Is that what you thought? I thought, she said carefully, that I should find out for myself. I looked at her profile, the clean, hard lines of it, the way she held herself even when sitting casually, not rigid, not performative, just present in a very specific, grounded way. And I said. She turned to look at me then. Direct, which was apparently significant in Kael'veth nonverbal communication. I'd learn later that direct eye contact was something they moderated carefully, that it had different meanings at different durations and distances, that holding it the way she was holding it now was a choice with weight to it. I think, she said, that you are a person who speaks before you think and then is honest about having done so, which is, the smallest, most careful pause, a more useful quality than speaking carefully and meaning something else. I held her gaze for as long as I could manage, which was probably 8 seconds. That's thanks, I said, I think. It was a compliment, she said. Yeah, no, I got that. She looked back at the stars. We sat there for the rest of the 2 hours. Mostly in silence. She asked me at one point about the scar on my forearm, and I told her about the combine harvester, and she listened with a focus that was slightly disconcerting, like she was filing every word with a purpose I couldn't identify. I asked her what the marks on her shoulder plates meant, and she explained the Verith rank system, which was more complicated than the Coalition equivalent, and involved a combination of combat record, diplomatic function, and something that didn't have a direct basic translation, but was something like ceremonial standing. When the 2 hours were up and she stood to leave, she paused for a second. Merit, she said. Yeah. The 72 hours ended 3 hours ago. I blinked. Oh, you didn't formally refuse. I blinked again. I forgot. She looked at me for a moment. That unreadable something was back in her expression. Yes, she said, I know. And she left. I went and found Cade. Not because I was panicking. Not exactly. But because Cade was the person on the ship whose judgment I trusted most completely, and I needed to explain what had happened and have someone I respected tell me what to think about it. Cade listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which he was very good at. When I finished, he was quiet for about 30 seconds. You forgot to refuse, he said. I know. Formally, in the 72-hour window. Cade, I'm establishing the facts. I know the facts. And you were on the observation deck with her for 2 hours. That's not, we were just talking. Right, Cade said. He had a very specific tone that he used when he was being neutral, but also thought you were not being entirely honest with yourself. He was using it now. And is there a protocol for what happens after the 72 hours? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Cade looked at me. He had a face built for patience, broad, calm, and capable of holding a steady expression through things that would make most people's faces go complicated. Dax, man. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about the answer before you open your mouth. Okay. Was the forgetting actually forgetting? I opened my mouth. Cade raised a hand. I closed my mouth. I thought about it, actually thought about it, instead of reaching for the first available deflection. The observation deck, the stars, the silence that hadn't been uncomfortable, the way she'd explained the rank marks and not talked down to me, the way she'd looked at the stars and said, here we are, and the way that had landed. The way I'd noticed her working hard at the corridor exercises, the small shift in my chest. I don't know, I said, which was more honest than what I would have said 30 seconds earlier. Cade nodded slowly. Right, he said. There's your answer. The first real combat situation of the deployment happened on day 47. Nothing dramatic to start. A routine supply escort, a pair of Coalition cargo haulers transiting through a contested grid square near the Drevash 9 approaches, and our battalion providing cover. 4 ships including the Varanthal, the cargo haulers, and 2 Vithrani intercept vessels. The Krathian Dominion had been making noise about the corridor, and Command decided a visible escort presence would be discouraging. It wasn't discouraging. 3 Krathian attack craft came out of a hard shadow off a debris field, moving fast, and the situation went from routine to active in about 40 seconds. I'm going to tell you about the 40 seconds. Not the whole engagement. The full battle was 22 minutes. There were 4 casualties on our side and none fatal, and the Krathians pulled back after the intercept vessels got into position. Coalition W fine, that's the official record. What I want to tell you about is 31 seconds into those 40 seconds. in the second cargo hauler's access corridor. We'd boarded to extract the crew. The hauler had taken a hit that disabled its maneuvering systems, and the crew needed to move before the Krathians got a boarding craft in position. My squad plus Saren and Kayvon moving through the hauler's interior toward the cockpit section where the crew of 3 had barricaded themselves. 31 seconds in, a Krathian boarding team came through an emergency access point on the port side. 4 of them. Krathian soldiers are big, wider than a human, lower center of gravity, heavily armored in the way of a species that developed military technology around the concept of just absorbing damage and keeping moving. They had pulse rifles that fired in short bursts and an aggressive tactic that was essentially controlled collision. Get close, hit hard, don't stop. The corridor was narrow, maybe 5 feet wide, low ceiling, 3 of my squad members between me and the Krathian boarding point. What happened next was over so fast that I only fully assembled it later, from multiple accounts and my own fragmented memory. Saren was at my shoulder. She had been at my shoulder for the last 2 minutes, moving through the corridor in the way the Verith moved, conserved, precise, reading the space around her with a focus that you couldn't really describe as cautious because there was nothing uncertain about it. She'd been quiet and in position, and I'd been half aware of her the way you're half aware of the most reliable element of your environment. The Krathians came through. She was past me before I'd fully processed the threat. Not in front of me, not from behind me. She moved through the space beside me so fast that the word past doesn't quite capture it. The air moved where she'd been, and she was already 4 feet forward, between the Krathians and the 3 members of my squad who hadn't had time to fully raise their weapons. The fight, and I'm going to use that word loosely, because it was really more of an interruption, lasted 11 seconds. I want to describe it accurately, and accurately means admitting that there were things I couldn't track in real time. I know that she engaged the lead Krathian with a strike combination that used his forward momentum against him, in a way that the physics of it made my head hurt slightly to reconstruct later. I know that she went under the second one's weapon swing rather than around it. I know that Kayvon, coming from the opposite angle, handled the third and fourth with a coordinated efficiency that told me these 2 had trained together for a very long time. 11 seconds. All 4 Krathians were down. Not dead, incapacitated, which was actually the harder outcome to achieve. But the coalition rules of engagement required incapacitation before lethal force in a boarding situation, and she had followed those rules with the same precision she brought to everything. My squad had not fired a single shot. We stood in the corridor in the specific silence that follows a violent thing ending, and Saren turned from the Krathians and looked at us, checking faces, doing a count. Her eyes stopped on me. The silver-blue ring was brighter, much brighter than the dim ambient glow of the observation deck, brighter than it had been in the staging bay. The xenobiology files came back to me, bioluminescent response to elevated physiological state. Associated with Hunt activation, but presence in modern Kael'veth during any high-intensity physical event. Her face was controlled, her breathing was controlled, but the eyes were bright. "You're not hit," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. She held my eyes for exactly as long as she'd held them on the observation deck, and then she turned and continued forward toward the cockpit section. Ramai, who was 19 and from Norway, let out a breath that was most of the air in his body. "Are you kidding me?" he said softly. We got the hauler crew out. The engagement ended. The Krathians withdrew. That evening, in the staging bay, there was a different atmosphere than there had been for 46 days. Not celebration exactly. We'd lost people on other ships, and a victory against 3 attack craft is a small thing in a deployment that hadn't really started yet. But the tension that comes from boredom and waiting was gone, replaced by the different tension of a unit that has done something real together. The Kael'veth contingent was present, spread through the bay, mixed with human and Vithrani soldiers, and it was different from the first day. Something had changed in the first day's careful spatial separation, the polite and guarded distance that both sides had been maintaining. Not gone, not resolved, but moved. Cade and Kayvon were in the corner talking with a Vithrani engineer, and a shared bottle of something that smelled like it would absolutely end me, but seemed to be fine for all 3 of them. Ramai had apparently decided to confront his earlier fear by going and sitting directly next to one of the other Verith and asking questions about their combat training, which was either brave or the nervous energy of someone who needed to understand the thing that had frightened them. Saren was sitting alone near the starboard bulkhead. I walked over and sat down. Not 6 feet away, closer than that, maybe 3 feet. I didn't know what distance that communicated in Kael'thas nonverbal, but I was past calculating it. She looked at me when I sat down. That was, I started. Standard engagement response, she said. That was not standard, I said. I've seen a lot of breach operations. That was not standard. She was quiet for a moment. You would have handled it, she said. Eventually, I said. Maybe, with more of my squad getting hurt than got hurt, which was nobody because of you. Another pause. In the Verith tradition, she said, the claiming bond has always been partly protective in nature, not possession, not ownership, protection. She looked at her hands, which was the first time I'd seen her look at something other than what was directly in front of her. I have been told that human soldiers don't fully understand this, that it reads as controlling. Depends how it's done, I said. She looked up. I'm not saying your culture has it figured out and mine doesn't, I said. I'm just saying, there's a difference between protection that respects someone's ability to handle themselves and protection that's about something else. What you did today felt like the first kind. She watched me for a moment. You were not frightened, she said, of what you saw of how I... No, I said. Most humans are. I know, I thought about how to say the next part. I think when you see someone do something that's surprising and that well, and the thing they did it for was to put themselves between you and harm, it's hard to be frightened of that. It changes the meaning. She looked at me for a long time, longer than on the observation deck, long enough that I could feel it. Merit, she said. Dax, I said, we're past merit. Dax, she said it carefully, like she was placing it correctly. The consideration period has passed. Yeah. In Kael'thas tradition, a consideration that goes unrefused is not a bond. The bond requires explicit declaration, from both. She was watching me steadily. I would not assume. No, I said, right. But, she said, there was that word again, that same word. But, I said, I am interested, she said. And something in her precise voice shifted just slightly on that word, and I understood, looking at her, that she had chosen it with that characteristic care, but that she had also meant it more plainly than her usual careful language. That interested was doing double duty here, carrying something she wasn't ready to be more direct about but was being honest about. I sat with that for a second. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. When you heard me say that thing in the staging bay, you came over. Yes. The diplomatic explanation, the tone-setting thing. That was real, she said. It was also, she paused, longer than usual, not the only reason. I looked at her, at the silver-blue light at the edges of her dark eyes, dimmer now, settled, ambient. At the clean, hard lines of her face, the absolute composure that sat over something that wasn't quite as composed as it looked. The Karvath Accords, I said. Joint deployment, what's the timeline? 8 months, she said. 8 months? Yes. That's a long time to figure things out, I said. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. I didn't think Verith smiled the way humans did, and I wouldn't learn until later that they had equivalents that were different in physical expression but identical in emotional function. But something. It is, she said. I leaned back against the starboard bulkhead. She didn't move away. We sat there, not 6 feet apart, not performing comfort or manufacturing it, just existing in the same space in the staging bay, while around us, the mixed battalion settled into the particular ease that comes after a hard day shared and survived. Ramai, across the bay, was laughing at something the Verith soldier had said. Cade caught my eye from the corner and raised whatever he was drinking in a small salute that was either congratulations or I told you so, and was probably both. The light in Bay 7 flickered 3 times and then, for the first time in 43 days, stopped. Oh, I said. What? That light's been flickering since I got on this ship. She looked up at the overhead. It stopped. Yeah. She looked back at me, and there it was, not a human smile exactly, but something in the same family. Something that changed the set of her face and made the silver-blue ring at the edges of her eyes glow just slightly warmer. Perhaps, she said, things are settling. I'm going to tell you something about that deployment, now that I've laid the groundwork of how it started. I'm going to tell you that 8 months is long enough to learn someone. Not completely. You don't fully learn anyone completely, and you especially don't fully learn someone from a species that has 12,000 years of different cultural substrate, but long enough to build something real. Long enough for me to understand, for instance, that Sarin Veldrath's composure was not coldness, that it was a learned discipline, a practice, the same way a human soldier learns not to flinch. That underneath it she had a sense of humor that was dry and precise, and hit me in the exact part of my brain that humor is supposed to hit. That she was patient with things she found frustrating and direct about things she found important, and that it was always clear which category something fell into. Long enough for her to understand, apparently, that I was not stupid despite my operational relationship with my own mouth. That I was good, genuinely good, at the part of the job that required reading people and adapting quickly, and that the same quality that made me say dumb things in staging bays also made me very effective in situations where you had to improvise. Long enough for two people to figure out, slowly and without any formal announcement, that what had started as a joke in a bay 7 had become something neither of them had been looking for, and both of them were going to have to decide what to do with. The Verith bond is not a human institution. I want to be clear about that, and clear that I went into whatever we were building without trying to translate it into human frameworks. Sarin explained it to me over many conversations, sitting on the observation deck, in mess corridors, during the quiet periods between exercises. She explained what it meant and what it didn't mean and what it required and what it didn't require. She was honest that it was serious, that it carried biological as well as cultural weight, that the Kael'veth who had written those regulations into the Karveth Accords had done so precisely because they understood that a non-Kael'veth entering a bond needed full, actual, real information. She gave me that information. And then she gave me the space to think about it. And then she went back to being the person I sat next to in staging bays and shared observation deck hours with, and trusted to be at my shoulder in corridors where Krathians came through walls. The formal bond declaration, and there would be one, eventually, though that's a different story for a different part. It didn't happen in the 8 months of that deployment. It happened later, after more time and more information, and more of the back and forth of two people from profoundly different backgrounds building something carefully and honestly. But the joke in the staging bay, the moment in the corridor, the observation deck and the stars, those happened in the 8 months of the Varanthal deployment. And I want to tell you honestly, if you're waiting for the part where I say I regret what I said in Bay 7, the joke that started it all, I don't. Not even a little bit. There's a moment that I keep coming back to, from about month 4 of the deployment. We were on stand-down rotation. The conflict in the Drevash 9 approaches had escalated, and then de-escalated, and then found a kind of suspended equilibrium that was probably going to hold until someone's political situation changed. And in the meantime, the Varanthal was holding position, and doing what coalition ships do in suspended equilibrium, which is maintenance and training and waiting. Sarin and I were on the observation deck. This had become a regular thing, not scheduled, not formal, just the place we both ended up when stand-down gave us time. Ramai had started calling it the spot, which we both ignored, but it was not inaccurate. She had a small device out, a Kael'veth thing, compact, made of a material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. She was doing something on it, something administrative from her manner, and I was going over supply manifests on my own comm, and we were just there, together without needing to be actively talking. At some point, she looked up from her device and looked at me. I looked up. What? I said. Nothing, she said. I looked at her. She looked at me. Are you going to tell me what you're thinking, or? I was thinking, she said, that in the 12,000 years of Verith tradition, the claiming declarations that have produced lasting bonds have generally started in strange ways. Not dramatic ways, strange ones. Is that in the records somewhere? I said. Some of it, she said. The rest is stories that we tell, the way your people tell stories. And I said, and she said with that smallest of possible something, that was adjacent to a smile. I was thinking that I'll take a Warbride, anyone, I'm available, low standards, comes with his own boots is certainly the strangest beginning I've heard of. I stared at her for a second. Then I laughed. Actually laughed, real, caught-off-guard laughter that I couldn't have managed politely if I'd tried. She watched me laugh, and the thing on her face, the thing that wasn't quite a human smile but existed in the same emotional territory, was there. Fully, clearly there. My standards, I said when I could talk again, were apparently not that low. No, she agreed. Or yours are just deeply questionable. Possibly, she said. We went back to our respective screens. The stars outside the observation deck were the same stars they always were, dense, old, bright in a way that made the darkness between them feel like texture rather than absence. The outer veldt, 12,000 years old by her people's reckoning. Full of history that neither of us had been around for, and full of future that we were both moving through in real time, day by day, figuring out what came next. In the staging bay, 3 decks below, Bay 7's light was still holding steady. There's a thing people always want to ask, when you tell them how this started. Weren't you scared? And the honest answer is, not of her, never really of her. The first second in the staging bay, before I understood the situation, yes, that was the spike of adrenaline that any reasonable human has when they realize someone who moves like that is standing behind them. That's biology. That's fine. But of her, of Sarin Veldrath specifically, as a person, no. Because the thing about the Verith tradition, the thing that took me months to fully understand, but that I think I started intuiting somewhere around day 3 on the observation deck. The claiming isn't about the hunt. It was once evolutionary history ago. The biology is still there. The speed, the luminescent eyes, the physical capabilities that are genuinely alarming if you think about them in the wrong context. But the Verith tradition, as it had developed over thousands of years of civilization, had taken that same instinct and pointed it in a completely different direction. It's about choosing someone, deliberately, with full knowledge and full attention, and then staying in that choice. That's not threatening. That's once you understand it, once you see it clearly, that's actually kind of remarkable. That a species built around predatory instincts developed, over millennia, a tradition structured entirely around the concept of consent and commitment. The Kael'veth are better at some of their worst instincts than we are at ours. I've thought about that a lot. Month 6. The Kar'veth Accord's first formal review. Coalition Command, Kael'veth Diplomatic Corps, multiple species representatives, all on a station over Drevash 9 that had been established specifically for the purpose. Our battalion was part of the security detail. It was administrative work, mostly stand in positions, look professional, try not to yawn during the diplomatic presentations. During a recess in the proceedings, I found myself in a corridor outside the main conference chamber next to a Kael'veth diplomat I hadn't met before. She was older than Sarin, older in the way that read across species, something in the way she held herself that communicated experience and settled authority. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you've been briefed on them, but are seeing them for the first time. Merritt, she said, the one from the staging bay. That's yeah, I said, that's me. She made a sound that might have been the Kael'veth equivalent of a dry laugh. Sarin Veldrath does not make choices lightly, she said. You should understand that. I do, I said. She has been Verith for 11 years. In 11 years, she has not expressed claiming interest in anyone. The diplomat looked at me steadily. And then a human corporal in a coalition staging bay made a joke. I know, I said. I'm as surprised as anyone. Are you, she said. It wasn't exactly a question. She came over because she wanted to see who you were, the diplomat said. Not for the diplomatic reason, that was secondary. She came over because something about what you said, the way you said it, the particular shape of it, struck her as interesting. And Sarin Veldrath very rarely finds things interesting. I thought about the observation deck. About I think you are a person who speaks before you think and then is honest about having done so. She told me I was a compliment, I said, that day. In the staging bay. The diplomat regarded me for a moment. She said you were honest, she said. Yes, that tracks. She turned to leave, then paused. The consideration period is long over, you know that. I know that. And the bond. We're talking, I said, taking it at the right pace. She looked at me with those dark Kelvith eyes, the silver-blue glow steady and ambient. For a species that lives as briefly as yours, she said, you choose an interesting pace. She walked away. I stood in the corridor and thought about that for a while. I called my mother that evening. Ship communication to Earth was expensive, and the signal delay made conversation weird and lurching, but I called her. She was in Beaumont, in the house I'd grown up in, and she picked up on the fourth attempt, which was her standard, a habit built from 40 years of not wanting to seem too eager. Dax, she said, in the tone she used when she was relieved and trying not to show it. You look thin. The food is terrible, Mama. I told you. I know what you told me. She looked at me through the screen, the signal delay making her image slightly static-y, her face moving in the small, careful way that video calls do when the connection is imperfect. She was 62 years old and had the kind of face that has always been the face you want to see when something is complicated. You look like you're carrying something, she said. Mother's. I met someone, I said. The silence on her end was long enough that I thought the signal had dropped. Then, someone. Yeah. On the ship. Yeah. Who? I thought about how to say it. She's part of the joint deployment, Kelvith Verith. Another silence. Dax. I know. Those are the... I know, Mamas. Your Aunt Berta would say. I know what Aunt Berta would say. Aunt Berta is wrong about most things, including this. She looked at me through the static-wise signal for a long moment. This was her thinking face, the face that meant she was getting past her first reaction to try to actually understand. Is she good to you? My mother said. Yeah, I said. Yeah, she is. Another pause. Then, in the voice my mother used when she had made a decision and was implementing it. Then you'll tell me about her. Yeah. Yes, when you're back. Her face through the screen was steady and complicated with something that was love plus worry in the specific proportion that only parents manufacture. You'll bring her if you can. We'll feed her, whatever she eats. She eats, it's a synthetic nutrient compound now for there. We'll figure it out, my mother said. That's not the hard part. I looked at her through the signal and the distance and the stars between us. No, I said, it's not the hard part. The deployment ended on month 8, day 14. Official end of the Carveth, Accord's first integration period. The Varanthal docked at Meridian Station, the big coalition transit hub on the edge of the outer Velt sector. Our battalion disbanded into its component units. The Verith contingent would return to their home territory for debriefing before the second integration period, which would be a different deployment, different assignment, and different cast. The last night on the Varanthal, the Bay threw itself a party that started with someone's unauthorized, still manufactured something that was very clearly alcohol regardless of what the label said, and ended around 400 with Ramai asleep against the starboard bulkhead and Balkan, the 9-foot Gruvani, rendering what turned out to be a surprisingly moving traditional song from his home colony, while everyone listened in the kind of respectful silence that transcends species. Saren and I sat on the observation deck. The Velt behind us, the station ahead, the specific quiet of a ship that has somewhere to be tomorrow and is letting tonight be tonight. Second integration period starts in 4 months, she said. Yeah. Different assignment. I've seen the preliminary orders. Coalition Frontier Corps, Outer Territories. I'm applying for a transfer, I said. She looked at me. To the Frontier Corps, I said. I put in the paperwork last week. She was quiet for a moment. That's, she started. I know, I said. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. That's not the same. I know, I said. I should have told you first, that's on me. But the decision was mine to make, and I made it, and then I'm telling you. She sat with that for a second. The specific way she processed things, she didn't react immediately. She let a thing settle, and then she responded from the settled place. I'd learned to wait for it. The Frontier Corps is, she said. Harder, I said, I know. I was going to say interesting, she said. I looked at her. The territory overlaps with Vareth patrol routes, she said. The mission alignment is, and there it was, the closest to a smile expression, holding steady, relevant. Yeah, I said, I noticed that. You noticed that? I'm not just muscles and good teeth, Saren. She looked at me. The silver-blue glow was ambient and warm, the low-light version that I'd come to associate with not Hunt State. The opposite of Hunt State, the resting version, the present version. No, she said quietly, you are not. The station lights were visible through the hull. Bright, structured, the artificial geometry of a place built by many species with many different ideas about what infrastructure should look like. Ahead of us. The end of this and the beginning of what came next. Dax, she said. Yeah. When the second period begins. Yeah. I would like to, she stopped, which was unusual. She almost never stopped mid-sentence. I would like to return to the conversation we have not yet finished. I knew which conversation she meant. Me too, I said. She looked at the station lights. It started as a joke, she said. It did. You are not currently making a joke. I am not currently making a joke, I confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I find that relevant. Good. We watched the station approach. My squad was down in Base 7, making noise, being the particular mixture of loud and sentimental that soldiers get when a thing they've been through is ending. Kayvon was with them. I'd seen him earlier teaching Ramai something from Kael'veth hand-to-hand that Ramai would probably not be able to replicate, but was going to spend months trying. Cade was probably quietly organizing the post-deployment paperwork that nobody else would remember to do. The Varanthal was ending. 8 months of recycled air and bad synthetic grain and flickering lights and joint exercises, and 2 people figuring something out at an observation deck over the outer veldt. Ending. And ahead of it, 4 months from now, a different ship, different assignment, different staging bay, and whatever the next part of this was going to be. You know what, I said. What? When this next part starts, when we're on the new assignment, I looked at her. I'm going to say something again. She turned to look at me. Are you? Yeah, and this time, I said, it's not going to be a joke. The silver-blue light around her eyes did something, not brightening exactly, not the Hunt activation spike. Something quieter. Something that had no clinical name in the xenobiology files because it wasn't a stress response or a physiological alert. Something that I recognized in that moment as the Kael'veth equivalent of the thing that happens in a human face when you tell them something they have been, without admitting it, hoping to hear. She held my gaze. I look forward to it, she said.